So we are just waiting for committee to start. I guess we can watch a few clips. In the meantime, committee's probably going to be like 5, I think even maybe 10 minutes late. And as I said in chat, I'm pretty sure Liberals are just going to move to adjourn like right away. So let's see how this goes. We might not even be able, we might not be here that long. So let's watch. I didn't watch Trudeau last night address the caucus. So let's watch that for a little bit. And I've got a few other clips we can watch in the meantime while we wait for committee.
Hello, everyone! Y a-t-il des libéraux dans la salle?
Oh my God.
Ah, bonsoir tout le monde.
Look at how happy he is.
Merci. Merci, mes amis. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here tonight. It has been an eventful couple of days. It hasn't been easy, and that's why I'm so happy to see you guys. You know, it's hard not to feel happy when we're like this, among Liberals, among family, because that's what we really are, a big family. Now, like most families, sometimes we have fights around the holidays. But of course, like most families, we find our way through it.
He really just loves people clapping for him.
You know, I love this country. I deeply love this party. I love you guys. And love is what families are all about. Ça fait du bien de vous voir. Merci. Merci à Brenda pour ton introduction, mais surtout pour tout ton travail.
You skipped the
Merci
French part.
aussi, évidemment. And to every single Liberal who was on the ground or on the phone these past weeks to get out the vote. You all worked incredibly hard. Thank you for carrying our colors and the message out to the people of Cloverdale, Langley City. I was there on the ground, seeing all of you, and...
All right, nobody cares. Committee started. He's so happy just to see people that aren't trolling him because he gets fucking heckled everywhere he goes. Excuse my language, but it's incredible to see how happy he is. Like, does he not look at the polls? Like, he's so unpopular. Hello, thanks for the 16% they managed to get. I know his caucus is so unpopular.
To order, welcome to meeting number 159 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents in order to protect the health and safety of all participants and especially our interpreters. A kind reminder to all those in person as well as online that for the safety of our interpreters, it is very important that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee commenced consideration of the Public Accounts of Canada 2024, referred to the committee on Tuesday, December 17th, 2024.
I'll first announce the witnesses. I'm just going to have a couple of words to say to kind of preempt any comments. First, our witnesses, and thank you all for agreeing to come in so quickly on short notice. I do appreciate it, as do all members. From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, thank you for you and your team. Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, Sana Garda, Principal, and Etienne Matt, Principal. From the Department of Finance, Chris Forbes, Deputy Minister, good to see you again. And from the Treasury Board Secretariat, Annie Boudreau, Controller General of Canada, good day, nice to see you in this morning. You and your team, Blair Kennedy, Executive Director, Government Accounting Policy and Reporting, John Daly, Senior Director, Public Accounts and Advisory Services. I've just got a couple of comments before I hear your points of order, points of protest on Public Accounts 2024. These documents were tabled yesterday, the very last day Parliament was sitting. As long as I have been chair, this committee, in report after report, has been urging and calling on these documents to be tabled by the end of September. They're typically tabled the end of sometime in October or early November. And this support, or this call, has had cross-party support. Now, I'm going to let members, of course, probe our witnesses today as to why they've come so late. But if you're protesting a sitting after yesterday, I'd urge you to direct your questions to cabinet ministers for not managing this document so it is presented to Parliament in a timely manner to ensure that members and the public have the accountability and transparency they deserve. On that note, I'm going to turn things over to our witnesses, who will each be given time to speak if they choose to take it. So, Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for up to... Yes, point of order.
Mr. Chair, I just, again, I respect you may complain about the tardiness of the tabling of public accounts. They were done according to standing orders. But my issue is not with the witnesses being here, but out of respect for the witnesses that are here, you've called this meeting last minute with less than 24-hour notice. You and I have had these discussions before. It's irrespectable of us. It's a disrespect to our committee. And the fact that the tabling of the documents happened yesterday, I'm questioning, we have to allow members to prepare themselves in order to ask the right questions. And here we are again, at your will. You didn't consult anyone. I didn't receive any emails from you. So I would ask, why do you not consult with committee? Why do you not respect the will of committee? When committee meetings are called, you've essentially, and it's an important exercise, I understand, but be respectful of members. You are not respectful of members, and I'm losing confidence in you, Chair, because in 10 years, never gone through this before. Only 2 meetings I've had in less than 24-hour notice. One was in October when you called you put a notice of meeting with less than 1 hour, and then you've put a notice of meeting with less than 24 hours. It's disrespectful to the Chair, and to us as a committee, as committee members. That's not how we operate. I've been with Mr. McCauley on government operations with an opposition chair. Never had the chair done that. It's disrespectful to our time. And I don't mind doing this exercise, but give us at least 48 hours. We require notice of motions, a 48-hour notice of motion to be tabled 48 hours.
Thank you.
Well, it's not going to go well today. I'm warning you, it's not going to go well today because you're disrespectful to us.
Thank you, Mr. Durain. Ms.
I told you guys. I told you.
I would just say that this was getting into the realm of debate. On a point of order. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Durain, I was not able to provide 48 hours notice because it was not known if the public accounts were going to be tabled yesterday. So as soon as I knew, we invited we confirmed with the departments, and they were all willing to be here. And I don't think it's asking too much for members of Parliament of this committee to be here as well, if officials can be here to speak to this document.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
I actually would like to seek some clarification from the clerk. I want to know when invitations were sent out to our officials, because if we only received such short notice, I would like to know how short notice did they receive in order to be here for you to get the resources of the room. I have had this conversation with all of our committee time and time again for the amount of time that I've been on this committee. And every single time you give us the runaround, you quite frankly are quite tyrannical in how you operate this committee. And it is really unfair.
No, I'm going to go to our witnesses very soon.
I'm still not finished. I'm seeking clarification. When exactly were invitations to officials sent out? Were they also less than 24 hours? Because that was the notice that we received. I have no problems. I have no problem being in this committee. I have no problem doing the work of this committee. And I have shown that, I've proven that in many ways by building consensus amongst all parties to try to pass forward motions to get the work done. The reality is, Mr. Chair, in the time that I've been on this committee, we have had more meetings and less reports than ever within public accounts. And that's a failure on your part, Chair. I really wish that we would stop playing this partisan politics, and I would like some answers here. So Please, I would love the clerk to help us clarify when were invitations to officials sent out.
Well, I asked the clerk to put the officials on notice on Monday that if the public accounts come, we would look to bring them in on Wednesday. Once we had indication that they were available and confirmation began to come in, you saw the first notice. We had, I think, two departments on it with a TBC, and that was filled out in the morning. There's no skullduggery here. If the government had done its job and tabled these in a timely manner, we would have dealt with this in a timely manner. I am put in this corner because of the actions of the government and the delay in this.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Durian, it's not my job to march to the government's beat.
It's not the government's beat, it's members' beat.
All right,
you're disrespectful.
I think
you're disrespectful.
Mr. Durian, it's not my intent to be disrespectful.
If you advise department officials on Monday, we found out at 4:30 yesterday. That is disrespectful to members.
Thank you, Mr. Durian.
Franchement.
Thank you, Mr. Durian, for your points of order. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our audit of the Government of Canada's consolidated financial statements for the 2023-24 fiscal year. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. With me today are Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, and Sana Garda and Etienne Matt, who are financial audit principals. Our audit of the government's financial statements is the largest of the audits carried out by my office. It involves almost every one of our financial auditors working to ensure that the data presented in the statements is complete and accurately reflects the government's financial results for the year. This work serves to help Parliament exercise its oversight of the government, promotes transparency and accountability, and encourages good financial management. You will find our independent auditor's report on the government's consolidated financial statements starting at page 55 of Volume 1 of the Public Accounts of Canada 2024. We issued an unmodified or clean audit opinion on the government's consolidated financial statements. A clean opinion means that the information in the financial statements was presented fairly and in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. In other words, readers can rely on the information provided in the financial statements. In 2023, our auditor's report was dated September 7th, and the public accounts were tabled on October 24th. This year, the government took longer to finalize the consolidated financial statements, which caused delays in completing our audit. The tabling of the Public Accounts of Canada happened yesterday. The public accounts are a key accountability document. They help Canadians and parliamentarians understand how public funds were spent compared to the commitments and promises that the government made in the year's budget.
When this information is not available in a timely way, its usefulness and relevance is compromised, and the opportunity for Parliament to use this information for decision-making is also reduced. Each year, my office also provides Parliament with a commentary that highlights important information about the results of all of our federal financial audits. This year, we are drawing attention to opportunities for improvement that we noted in the financial reporting process. The Office of the Comptroller General leads and oversees financial accounting and reporting across the federal government. Based on the results of our work, greater oversight is needed from that office for significant transactions and new programs across the government. This year's commentary highlights a weakness that we have covered in past reports. 80% of Crown corporations did not have their corporate plans approved before the start of their fiscal year. Delays in approving these plans must be addressed because they result in operational inefficiencies, project delays, or additional costs. We also raise observations about pay administration, deficiencies in the IT general controls over some key government systems, the accounting for asset retirement obligations, and national defense's inventory. These are recurring issues that my office continues to monitor.
Président,
Mr. Chair, I would like to thank the dedicated staff across the many departments, agencies, and Crown corporations involved in preparing the government's financial statements. This concludes my opening remarks. We will be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Et on vous remercie.
Thank you. So we'll now go to Ms. Boudreau for 5 minutes.
For the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I'm pleased to be joined by officials from my department, Blair Kennedy, Executive Director, John Daly, Senior Director. As committee members are aware, the production of the public accounts of Canada is set out in the Financial Administration Act. Deputy heads and chief financial officer of organizations are responsible for the accuracy of the information provided and are required to follow the Government of Canada accounting policies, which are based upon public sector accounting standards. The production and finalization of the public accounts is a joint responsibility between the Auditor General for Canada, the Department of Finance, and the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat, which include the Office of the Comptroller. As Comptroller, one of my responsibilities is providing leadership for financial management within the Government of Canada. My office provides government-wide leadership on accounting standards and preparation of departmental financial statements, including the preparation of the public accounts of Canada. Le ministère des Finances est responsable.
The Department of Finance is responsible for the comments and the analysis of the financial statement, which shows the current state compared to the budget. The Comptroller General compiles information from departments, organisms, and Crown corporations and publishes public accounts. And the AG's office works on the consolidated financial statements, which are included in public accounts. Mr. Chair, I'm happy to say that for the 26th year in a row, we issued a non-modified or a clean opinion from the AG's office. Mr. Chair, I'd like to also underline that this shows the high quality of the financial reporting in Canada and the work done by my civil service colleagues. I'd like to thank the financial management community of the Government of Canada, Department of Finance, the Comptroller General, and the Office of the Auditor General for their assistance in preparing public accounts.
Touch on the timing of this year's public accounts, which I know has been of interest of this committee. The government is legally required to table the public accounts no later than December 31st, following the end of the fiscal year, or within the first 15 days once the House reconvenes if it is not sitting during that period. And I want to assure the committee that we always endeavor to table the public accounts at the earliest opportunity. There were several significant transactions and new transactions that there were several significant and new transactions that were accounted for as part of the preparation of the 23-24 consolidated financial statements. My team and I needed to take adequate time to ensure that the results presented were fair and credible and were in accordance with public sector accounting standards. Some of these transactions included indigenous contingent liabilities and provisions for accounts receivable and loans, in particular, COVID-19 programs and the Canada student loans. The government also had to assess whether any important events happened between the financial statement date and the finalization of the public accounts. Plus précisément, il a dû déterminer si certains événements.
More specifically, we had to see if these certain incidents had to be accounted for or explained in the notes. One of the examples that required additional information was the recent confirmation of the non-authorized surplus of $1.9 billion in the Civil Service Retirement Fund. So we had to carry out additional work and analyses to complete public accounts this year, which explains the late date of its of the date we were able to share it. So, Mr. Chair, we remain engaged towards publishing the next public accounts by October 15, 2024, barring any exceptional incidents. I'd like to thank the committee for the interest and the time that they have given us as the Comptroller General of Canada. I have the honor and the privilege of being here today to talk about the Public Accounts of Canada 2024. My colleagues will also be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. And we'd like to thank you for being with us today.
Our first round will consist of 4 minutes, 6 minutes each. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for being with us, as always, witnesses. Mr. Forbes, the Globe and Mail reported former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, your former boss, on Friday received the news that she was to be fired from her position, and yet was still to come out to deliver the fall economic statement showing the $61 billion deficit, basically taking the fall for blowing past the $40 billion line in the sand. Were you tasked with preparing a transition binder for Mark Carney or any other incoming new finance ministers?
I did not prepare any transition material for any new minister until one was announced on Monday.
So when did you start preparing a transition binder?
We started preparing a transition binder on Monday.
Monday
transition
morning?
material when a new minister, when Minister LeBlanc was confirmed.
So after Minister LeBlanc, not before?
We had material. We always have material, evergreen material, ready for a change of ministers or deputies.
Have you met professionally with Mr. Carney?
Have I worked professionally with Mr. Carney?
No, met professionally in this current role.
No, I've not.
No. Do you meet with him at all personally?
I have not spoken to Mr. Carney. I spoke to him once when I was the Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada briefly. We exchanged emails, and that was the last time I've interacted with him.
There's been a widely reported conflict between finance and PMO over spending. What financial measures that finance deemed inflationary that ended up being included in the fall economic statement? So issues that finance pushed back against but still ended up in the fall economic statement.
Thanks for the question. We provide advice to the Minister of Finance on budget and fiscal matters. The Minister and then the government makes decisions on what measures to implement, what advice to follow, and we then implement. And so, I mean, that's all I can say about what decisions the government's taken.
The fired former finance minister commented on costly political gimmicks that the government can ill afford. What costly political gimmicks were included in the fall economic statement?
Well, I think you'd have to, I didn't write that letter that you're referring to. I think you probably have to ask Chrystia Freeland, the former Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, about
anything in the fall economic statement that you as Deputy Minister of Finance advised against?
Thanks for the question. I won't talk about the advice we provided versus the decisions the government took. The government gets to decide, and we implement the decisions the government takes based on our advice and their decisions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Boudreau, I have to join my colleague, the Chair, in expressing disappointment at the late publication of the public accounts. This committee 2 years ago in its public accounts report recommended October 15th. Your predecessor, I understand, committed to that date, and yet here we have, I think it's the latest tabling ever of the public accounts. It almost looks like it was done to cover up the fact that we ended up with a $61 billion deficit last fiscal year, again blowing past the line in the sand drawn by the previous finance minister. Was there any political pressure to delay this, the public accounts?
It's not. Oh, okay. And my predecessor, you're right, my predecessor.
I'm asking specifically, was there any
and
instruction?
The answer is no.
Okay. So it just happened organically.
Like I was saying, there were a lot of big transactions this year. But
would you provide in writing those transactions, please?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you mentioned one of them was the pension, and help me out here. The pension The surplus, that was realized in the current fiscal year, not the previous fiscal year. So why did you mention that as one of the items that caused the delay, the consideration of that?
So it is one of the subsequent events that we had to look at.
Right, but help me out under the PSAB, the rules, it would be recognized in the fiscal year that it occurred in, which is the current fiscal year, not the previous fiscal year. So help me out, why did that cause a delay on the previous year's books?
If the events existed at March 31st, 2024, we needed to take in consideration all those transactions. Contingent liabilities is one example.
I'm not talking about the contingent liabilities.
And the non-permitted surplus, it's another example. For this one, we did not adjust the books. What we did, we've put a note to the financial statements for the reader to be informed of that transaction.
The contingent liabilities, when did they change? I guess when did they become assessed as likely to result in future payments? The triggering from it to become listed in the public accounts and therefore delaying the public accounts.
Yeah. So again, if the situation existed...
No, I'm asking when.
So
when was it assessed to likely result in future payments?
We have a lot of contingent liabilities. We need to look at all of them individually.
Specifically the $16 billion for regarding the Indigenous.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not only one transaction. It is several transactions included in that amount. So we have to make a determination one by one in terms of the likelihood of a payout and if we're able to estimate an amount.
Mr. Forbes, in the public accounts, it states federal pollution pricing system is revenue neutral. We had this discussion last year. It's not revenue neutral. We've stated as such. Why is it listed as it is revenue neutral?
Thanks for the question. I mean, the government has committed to and is doing over time returning the
but
money
to... But it's not revenue
to...
neutral. And actually, if you look
Mr.
at
Colley, that is your time, I'm afraid. Turning now to Mr. Erskine-Smith. Good to see you today, sir. And you have the floor, please.
He's not in his podcast room.
I do understand, Chair, the consideration where the late tabling of the documents. I do think fairly it would have been good to send us a note on Monday just so we were kept apprised of it, but I won't dwell on that. I want to start with actually where Mr. Macaulay left off in terms of the contingent liabilities. So, so Canadians have a better understanding of what this actually means. We're talking about a fairly large number, $76 billion, but there's in this particular document it accounts for it looks like 16.5 or so new $1 billion in terms of contingent liabilities, and I'll read it. It says, as part of advancing its commitment to resolve past injustices by accelerating the resolution of Indigenous claims, the government recorded expenses of $17.8 billion in 2024, of which $16.4 billion is related to these contingent liabilities. So can you just spend a little time articulating a little bit more concretely, I guess, what that means?
So I will start with the definition of contingent liabilities, and after that, I will provide some examples. So contingent liabilities are possible obligations that may result in future sacrifice of economic benefits arising from existing conditions or situations involving uncertainty. And the uncertainty will ultimately be resolved one or more future events not only within the government's control occur or fails to occur. So contingent liabilities are distinct from liabilities that there is a degree of uncertainty as to whether a present obligation to sacrifice economic benefit exists at the financial statement date, March 31st, 2024. So there are two basic characteristics of a contingent liabilities. First one, there must be an existing condition or a situation like I was explaining earlier, and there must be an expected future event that will resolve the uncertainty as to whether a present obligation exists. For a contingent liability to be present, there must be an existing condition or situation at the financial statement date that indicates that the government may have a liability. And the existing conditions or situation could be, for example, a legal case.
But I don't want to entirely cut you off there, but it might be helpful to offer an example that is more accessible than reading some of the definitions you're reading there. So we'll give my constituents are saying that's a big number, $16.5 billion of new accounting here. What's an example?
Using a court example, if a court case is filed before the end of the fiscal year, so it's filed before March 31st, 2024, there may be a need to record a contingent liability for that court case when the payment is likely. And the assessment of likelihood is complex and may include such items as filing a new claim, certification of a class action claim by the court, the completion of a legal risk assessment by Justice Canada, new information regarding the class size or other factors that influence the potential value of a claim, and a decision by the government to enter into negotiations to settle out of court.
Right. So this isn't. I mean, you'll hear Conservatives cast this as, well, you're widely missing the mark here, and sort of suggesting it's profligate spending, certainly. But this is not new program spending. This is accounting for liabilities that pre-existed this government. Is that right?
So we have three types of contingent liabilities for Indigenous, and one of them is specific claims. And as you said, specific claims deal with past grievances of First Nation related to Canada's obligation under historic treaties. So at March 31st, we'll look at the conditions, and we'll look if we're able to assess the likelihood of a payout, if we're able to assess the amount that will go with that payout, and we have to make a determination if we need to take a contingent liabilities. In some cases, if we're not able to determine an amount, we'll put a note in the financial statements.
Right. I appreciate that. I want to switch gears a little bit because the other piece, this a smaller piece, is related to, I think it's $1.2 billion a write-down of expired COVID treatment and vaccines, and another $3.5 billion with respect to loans and receivables related to emergency supports. And this has been a bit of a politically contentious issue as well, where sort of there's been accusations that the CEBA program was mismanaged, and obviously the Auditor General has a report on this. And I do want to just, there's been some question as to the value of the CEBA program and what purpose it served for small businesses. And Mr. Forbes, could you speak to, take us back to March 2020 and to the dire straits in the ensuing months that small businesses were facing? How necessary was the CEBA program for businesses to survive?
Sorry, thanks for the question. The CEBA program, I mean, we talked about this, I think, last week or the week before. We think it was part of a suite of programs that really helped support the Canadian economy through the really difficult parts of the pandemic, and maybe the evidence that I would look at would just be, some of the results for small businesses in terms of survival rates, low bankruptcy or insolvency rates, and this was kind of the key measure that was there to support small businesses.
Thanks, Bill.
Appreciate you. Imagine an alternate scenario here where you've got a leader who says something like, I don't believe in big fat government programs, and I just want to cut taxes and red tape. And how would that have helped small businesses in the course of a pandemic?
Point of order, hypothetical? Leading the witness?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think absent the CEBA program, I don't have a counterfactual, but absent the CEBA program, we would have seen a much higher rate of small business insolvencies and probably bankruptcies during the pandemic. I mean, I think that's...
and absent the CERB, how many people would have struggled individually who have lost their employment?
Yeah, I don't have a number for you, but to say I think when we look at the suite of benefits that were provided, I think our assessment would be that those were necessary to protect Canadians at a time when the economy was largely shut down, when businesses, both in terms of the debts they owed and managing their borrowings and in terms of current activities were severely impacted. And so... But
what if we just said, we're just going to cut your taxes?
That is your time, sir. I gave a little extra there because you were in a good exchange, but we will come back to that, I hope. Suivant.
Next up, we go to Ms. Sinclair de Gagné, remotely, for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. I would also, of course, like to wish you a happy holiday season. So I'll directly start asking my questions. I have many questions. The first one will be for Ms. Boudreau. Now, if we look at the details of the public accounts, we see that the net debt hasn't really fluctuated that much because there's a big difference in terms of the assets coming from pensions. And if you look at the numbers between 2023 and 24, there is a difference of $7 billion. And in my riding only, Ms. Boudreau, I received within the span of a week 30 emails from civil servants who live in my riding and who are accusing the government of stealing their pension. And when you look at the numbers, you see that the government actually used some of the excess, the surplus there, and the government seems to have taken an amount that is far in excess of the amount that they have the right to manipulate. And you also mentioned this. This is one of the transactions that caused a bit of a delay in the filing of public accounts. And what is bizarre is that what caused a delay in public accounts presentation is the government who decided to go and use some of the money that is put into the system by civil servants, their contributions. So what can you please explain to us the $7 billion difference, or how much of that comes from the civil servant pension funds? Thank you very much for the question. When it comes to the $1.9 billion that I mentioned, the surplus, the non-allowed surplus, that has no impact on the consolidated public accounts of the government for March 31st, 2024. But there's a $7 billion difference when it comes to assets from the public sector pension plans, because that must explain the bulk of the difference. Well, I can get back to you with a written response, but what I can say at the moment is that the surplus, non-authorized surplus, has no impact, and people who are currently retired and who will be retiring soon will have no impact on their pensions in connection with the surplus. But that you cannot know, because you're never safe from a potential catastrophe in 5-10 years, and people who will be retiring in those time frames. Ms. Boudreau, you cannot say that. I mean, you don't have a crystal ball. You cannot really anticipate the fact that the pension system will not crumble, will not collapse. Because what level of protection does it have if you go and get money from this fund, the contributions from civil servants, public sector officials? Who made that decision, Ms. Boudreau? Well, it's a legal decision. But I asked who made the decision. Well, the president of the Treasury Board published a report, and the report was very clear. It was from the actuaries, and it said that the maximum allowable limit was 125%, and they had the legal obligation to let these funds exit the pension funds. Well, the labor union seems to be questioning the legality of using that much money, $1.9 billion in expenditure. So there's a press release from the labor union, and they seem to know what they're talking about, and that this amount is far in excess of what needs to be taken by the government. But you're saying the labor union doesn't know what they're talking about? Well, what I'm saying is that the amount was calculated by the chief actuary, and the $1.9 billion amount was what they ended up with, and this was put into the Treasury funds. So, in fact, civil servants, just in my riding, within a span of a week, I got 30 emails, and I'm assuming thousands and thousands others are being told untruths by their labor union. Well, I don't have the letter that you're referring to, so I cannot confirm its validity. I don't have access to it. Thank you. The Professional Institute of the Civil Service of Canada is against the government taking $1.9 billion from the pension funds, which was not authorized. So this amount represents the collective contributions of civil servants. And this letter, this press release rather, was sent by the labor union on November 29th, Ms. Boudreau. So this is all very bizarre. and the government should be working in closer connection with the labor union, because $1.9 billion taken from the pockets of the civil servants, it's an enormous amount. So I will need a written response on that to understand why there's a difference between 23 and 2024 of $7 billion in the assets from the pension funds of the civil sector, public sector. So my next question will be for Mr. Forbes. I asked the question to your officials actually on Monday during the lockup. I did not get many answers. I hope I'll have one today. For the $1.3 billion that was budgeted for the border, so this amount, where does this money come from, $1.3 billion? And the Department of Finance, has the department started to come up with a plan for these $1.3 billion for the control of the border? Well, to answer your question, yesterday there was an announcement by a number of ministers on a plan for the border, which provided some details for that amount of $1.3 billion. I do not have the text itself with me, but it contains some details for that plan for the border. Thank you very much. Up next.
Cannings, joining us virtually as well. You have the floor, sir, for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to start off by kind of picking up where Madame Sinclair de Gagne was going with the pension fund situation. I think all MPs across the country have heard a lot of concern from public servants who are putting deferred pay basically into their pension fund, and now they find that they've been paying so much that it's created a surplus that has gone above the legal amount, and so now that part of that surplus has gone into general revenue. And as you know, these pension funds come from a contribution by both the workers and the government. And I think the workers and pensioners are upset that they don't seem to be getting, if they've been paying too much, they're not getting that money back directly to themselves or through other mechanisms. It's just going into general revenue. They don't mind the government portion going back, I'm sure. But I'm just wondering, is there any mechanism to do that? Is there any plans? And if there isn't, why isn't there? Because it seems to be patently unfair, and that's why we are being swamped with messages from our constituents.
Thank you for the question. When the surplus was in the document tabled by the President of Treasury Board, she mentioned that the government is looking at options for the future, and she will be discussing that with stakeholders. So I don't have more information at this moment when it will be discussed and with which stakeholders will be involved. So there's nothing else I can offer, I can tell you today on this one.
And those options would refer to what to do with the extra money, or options to make sure we don't have such an incredible surplus in the future? This all started, I believe, back in the Harper administration. They changed the structure of the pension funds, so new employees were getting a different kind of pension so that they would have to work longer to get it, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems that there has to be some rejigging there as well for the future, as well as what to do for the present. Do you provide any advice to the government on those options?
Like I was saying, the president is required to do something when there is a surplus above 125%. And this is what she did. She tabled a document that was supported by the actuary that showed the non-permitted surplus situation. That amount will be transferred into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And again, some discussions will happen in the new calendar year with key stakeholders, and she will be in a position to provide more information next year.
Okay, I'll move on to the statement in the public accounts that said that revenues increased by 11.7 billion. At the same time, income tax revenue decreased 0.7%, mainly due to lower corporate taxable income and income from non-residents. So if revenues from corporate taxes were down, who paid this extra $12 billion and how did they pay it?
Thanks for the...
Who picks up that difference?
Thanks for the question. I'm not sure it's a question of difference, but just to say that different revenues grow at different paces, and we have, other large sources of revenues. Personal income taxes grew, GST revenues. We have a number of other revenue sources that grew, and so those offset the effects of the corporate tax revenue decline, and that is sort of normal in any fiscal year, that different bases will grow at different paces, just depending on the state of the economy and other developments.
So do you have any sense of why corporate taxes went down?
Well, I think, as we said, the growth in corporate taxable income was one piece of it, for sure. I could turn to my colleague, Ms. Dancy, who may have other information.
This guy's a snooze
specific
fest.
Details.
Oh, happy to add just a little. What we've described in the Fall Economic Statement, Annex 1, there's a bit of a discussion about the current fiscal forecast. And, Deputy, as you've noted, there's a general slowdown in the economy, which has been facilitated to arrive at this soft landing, has resulted in just a lower corporate taxable income or profit stream than we previously had foreseen.
So can you just tell me what the total revenue from corporate taxes were in the last year? Anybody have that figure?
Sorry, $82.5 billion was the corporate tax revenue that's recorded in the public accounts.
And the amount for personal income taxes?
$218 billion. I think I've got the right number.
Okay, so, I think it's well known that, big corporations especially, and I'm not talking about small businesses here at all, have elaborate ways of going through loopholes to decrease their tax amount. It's been calculated that, we're losing $10 billion a year on these loopholes. Is that something that anybody here today would provide advice to the government on how to close those loopholes? How to, I don't think we want to put an extra burden on companies that are suffering and struggling. And obviously, if they are, they're not paying much tax because they're not making much money. But for the companies that are,
Mr. Forbes, I'm going to have you're well over your time, but I'm going to have Mr. Forbes answer your question, and then we'll come back to you on this line. Mr. Forbes, you can answer that, please.
Thanks. Yeah, a couple of points. We work very closely with the Canada Revenue Agency to identify places where the tax system, where there is avoidance of taxes that should otherwise be paid. I think there's been a number of steps taken in the past few years to tackle some of this tax, this unfair tax avoidance, tighten rules. And, there's an ongoing effort, quite honestly, with the Canada Revenue Agency to identify these pieces, because I think the fairness of the tax system, it's important that corporations and individuals feel that, that the tax that is owed is being collected. So it's an ongoing battle, and we work closely with the Revenue Agency to tackle those issues.
Thank you very much. That ends our first round. Our second round will consist of 6 members with various times each. Miss Rempel Gardner, pardon me. We've known each other for so long. I apologize about that. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and allow me to put on the record that Teddy is a wonderful dog. I just feel like that should have gone in the Hansard, so I will continue. Mr. Forbes, have you developed an economic analysis of a potential 25% tariff on exports to the United States should the new American administration implement this measure in January?
Thanks for the question. We're certainly working on a range of scenarios in terms of what might happen. I mean, this is it's a statement, but obviously the new U.S. administration is not in place.
Can you table any interim results that you have on that with this committee?
I would have to see what I have available, but we have done some work in this area.
Okay, so it's approximately a month away, so that exercise has not been complete yet?
I would say it's in some ways it's evergreen, right? I mean, we're trying to figure out as we go exactly how this will impact us.
Have you forecasted how many jobs would be lost, or the impact on the labor market in Canada should a 25% tariff be implemented on January 20th from the American administration?
Thanks for that. Certainly, I would say there's two parts to that question. We don't have final numbers that I could share. We're working both with businesses and provinces and our own models to determine
So that
impacts.
has not been, we're a month away from that, and there is no plan or no economic analysis of that impact complete yet.
I would say there's economic analysis that's been done.
Who's holding the pen on that analysis right now?
Well, the main departments that would be involved would be Global Affairs, the Department of Finance.
But who's coordinating it?
It's a collaborative process.
Is there one person? Like, is there a project management office for this?
No, there's no project management office,
Okay.
but we have
So there's some people that are working on it off the corner of their desk?
Mm.
Would that be an accurate characterization?
Thanks for the question, but no, I wouldn't characterize it that
So
way.
who's in charge of that?
Well,
You?
officials report to the cabinet. There's a cabinet committee on Canada-U.S. relations, which is
So who's
chaired,
on that cabinet committee right now?
well, it's chaired by Minister LeBlanc. There is a number of other
Okay,
ministers.
so the fresh cabinet minister, as of yesterday, I got it. I think it's pretty clear that we don't have an analysis on that done. That's wild. I really hope you guys get on that for the sake of this country. Does your budgetary forecast for fiscal year 2024-2025 include additional spending to meet Canada's 2% NATO commitment?
Thanks for the question. The budget, the FES, the Fall Economic Statement, has the investment line from the defense policy review that took place and was announced in Budget 2024.
I'm asking about the upcoming.
Yeah, I'll finish the answer. There are no additional amounts for the commitment to get to 2%.
Have you directed your has the government directed your department to conduct an economic impact analysis of the government's proposed industrial emissions cap? Are
you speaking about the oil and gas
Correct.
cap? I think there's a cost-benefit analysis that would be included, a regulatory impact assessment that's done with all regulations that would have been submitted to the Treasury Board.
But there has been an economic impact analysis done. Can you table that with this committee as well?
That would be with the Treasury Board. I'll have to check as to what I could table. It's been submitted to Treasury Board, so it may be a cabinet confidence.
Last week, the parliamentary budget officer said the government's, I like to call it the GST tax trick, would cost as much as $2.7 billion if province with an HST asked for compensation. Has the government given your department any indication that they intend to compensate provinces who have not waived their compensation requirement?
We have put forward in the Fall Economic Statement the cost of the federal portion. The government has indicated that provinces that wished to join could do so by paying for themselves.
But there are some who have said that they would not waive the requirement. Have you forecasted a potential compensation or following through with your compensation requirement?
I'm unaware of which provinces.
Saskatchewan, for example.
Yes, Saskatchewan is not thanks for the question, but Saskatchewan's not a harmonized sales tax province, so they wouldn't.
Are there any other provinces who have said that they have not had their requirement waived?
Not to my knowledge, but I can't confirm that.
Was the cost of renting hotel rooms for refugees and asylum claimants what was the total cost of renting hotel rooms for refugees and asylum claimants in fiscal year 2023-2024?
Thanks for the question. I don't have the answer for that. I would have to, maybe one of my TBS colleagues would have that.
Can you please table that with committee?
Of course.
How many refugees and asylum claimants were housed in hotel rooms in fiscal year 2023-2024?
We'll come back with an answer to the committee.
You will
in
table that
writing.
with the committee. What was the total cost of per diems for refugees and asylum claimants in fiscal year 2023-2024?
We'll come back to the committee with an answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is your time, Ms.
Thank you.
Rempel-Garner. Suivant, c'est M. Drouin pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you,
Doreen. Come
Chair.
on.
I'd like to thank the witnesses who are here on short notice. You knew the meeting was happening on Monday. At least you had more time than us, but that's not your issue. It's an issue I have with the chair.
To the controller, just with regards to the tabling of public accounts. Now, normally I know that they should have been submitted 1 month before. You've raised large financial transactions as a potential excuse as to the reason, the rationale as to why we couldn't table the public accounts in time. But understanding that, how are you changing? Are you guys changing your internal processes to ensure that we do table public accounts in a timely fashion, and we do respect that October 15th date that we had set out to from this committee that we had set out to respect? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. And I would like to say that I started that position on April 15, 2024. And year-end was March 31st, 2024. So I was not there for the fiscal year that we just tabled. Mm-hmm. So obviously I needed time to look at those transactions and make sure that I was comfortable with them. Having said that, as you said, the commitment made by the former CG was to table by October 15, 2025. So we still have that commitment. And yes, we are looking across the departments and the crown corporations that are included in the public accounts to make sure that we have proper controls, proper mechanism, and also that we are able to speed the process this year. As the auditor mentioned, she has a commentary in this year in terms of my office having a stronger role in terms of working with CFOs as well as deputy heads, and that's our commitment that we have. We do accept that observation, and we'll make sure that next year we are in a better position to table earlier.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse, monsieur.
Thank you very much for your answer. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion. It's very quick. I hope the committee will be able to deal with it quickly, and then we'll be able to get back to the questions. Now, you can maybe see this coming because we seem to be having issues getting information, so I seem to need to put guardrails around your chairmanship, Mr. Chair. So that's only because we want to get to do information in line, with the exception of a meeting called for 104.6, that no member of the committee will be called into a meeting during the holiday break period. So it's very short, the motion, but this is just to put guardrails, if you will, around your position as a chair, because I cannot keep working like this.
Motion is out of order. We're here to hear from witnesses today, Mr. Drouin. This is not time for committee business, so I'm ruling your motion out of order.
Is he going to challenge the chair?
Chair?
Are they going to challenge that?
I challenge your ruling.
I knew it. I knew it.
Point of order.
Point of order.
And then you get the floor.
I challenge your ruling.
The ruling is being challenged, and we will hear from members if we wish to continue hearing from witnesses, or if we wish to turn to debate this matter about working in January.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Monsieur Drouin. No. Mr. Erskine-Smith.
No.
Madame Khalid.
No.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
No.
Ms. Yip.
No.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner.
That's fine. Yes. You're fine.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Oui.
Mr. Cannings.
No.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Very good. I'm just going to suspend the meeting. I'll check with Mr. Durian. Have you sent the motion to the clerk yet? I'll come back to you just a few minutes, please.
I actually missed that. What was the motion about? For committee business? I was too busy checking up a few links. It's not to adjourn. It's to, what was it to do? Can somebody in chat tell me what I missed there? Not having meetings in January. Okay, thank you. That sounds exactly like something the Liberals would do. No committee work in January. Me and Chris are just talking about that in chat. Literally, Chris just asked in chat, yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to keep an eye on the schedule. They may have emergency meetings over the next 5 weeks. And then I replied saying, same usually around the holidays, though, like, between Christmas and New Year's. Everyone takes a break, but in January, the first 3 weeks while the house is off, they might call committees. And that's usually what Public Accounts does, and that's usually what OGO does, because they're both conservative chairs, so they just don't give a crap. They're just like, no, we want to work. Let's get some work done. And it's always the Liberals that don't want to work. Surprisingly enough, Bloc and NDP voted in favor with the Liberals, because I guess they just don't want to work either. So now we're going to see the motion. We're going to do a bit of committee business. They're going to get to a vote. And if Bloc and NDP voted that way already, then they're going to vote the same way again. They just don't want to work. It's only the Conservatives that actually do want to work and get to the bottom of things. It's not like they actually do anything to begin with. You have a good point there, Savage. Although there's been a lot of things that have happened in committees that I think people do tend to forget. For example, the reason why we actually got Christian Firth called to the bar was because of committee and his testimonies in committee. The reason why we are trying to find Stephen Anderson, who has fled the country apparently, we're trying to call him to the bar, but his address, his phone number, his email, everything it's not his anymore. The phone number doesn't belong to him. The address isn't his anymore. He sold the house. Nobody can find this guy. So we're all suspecting that Stephen Anderson fled the country, because otherwise we'd have him at the bar. And that was because of his testimonies in committee. So committees can get some things done for sure. I have to work an entire year to get my holidays. I know. It is a little bit ridiculous how much time they get for constituency time when we know most of it is just vacation time. And Michelle is there. Let me see. Young Global Leaders, and Michelle is there. Michelle Garner. Is it the same Michelle? Can you send that link, Sunshine? Because I don't see that. I'm Googling that right now. Even if you Google Young Global Leader WEF, you get the Young Global Leaders link on the WEF form, and her name's not here. Like, did you click down something else to find? Young Global Leaders, Michelle. No, I'm on the link right here. This is the link, Michelle, and you can see it's Young Global Leaders, and her name's not there. Like, she's made statements against Klaus Schwab saying that that she's not. Yes, I also asked her that too, and no response from her. No, she did respond. Just me. We're just watching committee, so I'm assuming Sunshine's just now that we're on break, she's able to go take a look. But you're welcome to share the link in chat, Sunshine, if you do find it, because I don't see anywhere. Is there anything we can watch in the meantime while this committee is adjourned? Let me see. Usually we just tune into the House, but obviously the House is not sitting, so... She's not on WEF. Yeah, even if she was, she wouldn't be allowed to... Michelle says she is openly on YouTube. She said, I am young global leader. Yeah, but how old is that? Michelle Garner. WEF. I don't see any of this either, man. Where are you guys seeing this? I'm looking everywhere. I can't see this. I don't even see this on YouTube. Months old? Where? Can you send a link to, Flip? Because I don't see it, man. Yeah, I've... Michelle Rampel said she wrote a paper on something and was invited to go to WEF to present her paper as a young global leader. She was on the website, but not anymore. Yeah, I'm telling you, I don't think any conservatives actively right now are supporting the WEF. And if they were, Pierre's not going to have them as a minister. Michelle Garner's YouTube. Global leader. I'm literally searching her YouTube right now. I don't see anything on her YouTube that's showing that she's pro-WEF. Can't find a single thing. She just considers herself a global leader. Yeah, I don't see anything comparing her to the WEF. She has a quite interesting YouTube. I didn't know she has 110,000 subscribers. That's pretty good for a house whip. Very, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to try to see if there's anything else that we can watch in the meantime, because the committee's still adjourned. Michelle Garner is not WEF and is not affiliated in any way whatsoever. See, that's what I think. How long is the break? I gotta have lunch. I don't know. Sometimes this can take a little bit for them to get the motion sent to the clerk in both official languages for everybody to read the motion, depending on how long it is. Sometimes they take a health break during this time and they just go to the washroom and things like that. It is halfway through the committee, so it's about that time that they might do a health break. Usually doesn't take more than 5-10 minutes, but sometimes it can be 15-20. Let's see if there's anything else that we can watch in the meantime. I'm trying to find something. Oh, we can watch Trudeau getting trolled yesterday. If you guys haven't seen that, I think somebody mentioned it in chat earlier, and I just saw the video this morning. Trudeau getting freaking rinsed outside of the Liberal caucus meeting, or not the caucus meeting, the fundraising event.
You fucking scumbag! You're garbage! You're garbage!
This is actually funny.
Where's my tax money? Fuck Trudeau! You fucking piece of shit!
Look at how many cops he needs.
Fuck you!
So just one more time.
Fucking scumbag!
So there he is right there, waving at people that are telling him, fuck you. It's just...
Justin, where's my tax money? Where's my tax money? Fuck Trudeau! You fucking piece of shit! Fuck you! Fuck Trudeau! Fuck Trudeau!
Very interesting. Let's see. This was last night as well.
For us to have any chance in the next election.
You mentioned other MPs, and I certainly don't expect you to name names, but I think that we've heard from people in and around the Prime Minister that Cabinet's going to make a difference, right? And certainly that was, why so much weight was given to Minister Freeland's or former Minister Freeland's comments.
Right. We'll watch this clip after committee's back on.
Okay. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor, please.
And I should use my time to rail at our witnesses, and then you can just get back to us later. No, I won't do that. I have to express my extreme disappointment with the government, and I understand what they're trying to do here, which is what we've seen in the past from this, the Liberals' is a guillotine motion to stop us from studying the various scandals that this government has been involved in. This issue we have before us today about the so-called late meeting for the public accounts is solely on the government. This is, from what I have seen, the latest that we have actually had a tabling of the public accounts in history, and I advise anyone or welcome anyone to send me an email or a text if I am wrong. I've had the Library of Canada look into this, and we've had December tablings before, but never this late, also on basically the final day of the House of Commons. If it wasn't tabled yesterday, there is a legal requirement to have it done by the 31st, but the House isn't sitting then. We would actually be having the public accounts tabled in the House at the end of January. As it is, I think it's 261 days after year end. For those, for the 3 or 4 people watching at home, hi, Mom. And I'm sure the other 2 is my wife and one of my 2 sons, because one of my other sons has a better life, better things to do. Canada's fiscal year end is March 31st, and we're now into December. The Toronto Stock Exchange, TMX, TSX, requires any publicly listed company to have their accounts publicized. I think it's within 30 days. If the government of Canada was on the TXS, we would be delisted for not having the accounts open. And why is this important? Well, several reasons. One is accountability, but parliamentarians are asked and tasked to vote on expenditures. We just had supplementary estimates come out. It was $26 billion, and we were asked to vote on these before we even knew if there was any money in the bank. Whether we were told, it was like going to, imagine like going to a bank and asking for a mortgage for $20 million for a house, but telling the bank, you have to tell me yes or no before I'll tell you if I have a job or if I have money in the bank or finances or the ability to pay that. And that's what the government has done with the delays with the public accounts. The supplementary estimates were reported, I think, 2 weeks ago, $26 billion forced to vote on before we found out the government blew 55% past their previous guardrail. Fired deputy leader and fired finance minister Chrystia Freeland has stated that was our $40 billion deficit was our guardrail. We would not go past it. It had as much credibility as Barack Obama in Syria drawing his red line in the sand about chemical weapons. Oh, went over that. Well, here's a new line in the sand over slaughtering Kurds. Oh, line in the sand. They blew by it. We voted on it after being assured repeatedly that we would not go past a $40 billion deficit. And yet, what was the deficit when we actually found out yesterday, weeks after we approved the supplementary spending? $61 billion. We should have had this information long ago. And for us now to actually ask to work an extra day in the House of Commons to examine this money, the $61 billion, spending $21 billion blown past, and the Liberals say, no, it's inconvenient for us, we shouldn't be doing it. I'm happy to work day. I'd rather be back home. I had meetings planned in another city today that I've had to blow off again, but this is important. $21 billion. The Canadian dollar is cratering. It's lost 4 cents. If anyone around the table is heading, or the 3 people, maybe 4 now, watching at home are heading to the States over Christmas, the dollar's cratered 4 cents already in the last couple months. Now we have a financial crisis of, we have a finance minister. Well, maybe we don't. Well, maybe it's Francois Champagne. Well, maybe it's not. Well, who's next up? Randy Boissonnault. Like, how bad is the government that they don't even know before they're firing their finance minister to have the next one lined up? Apparently Mark Carney was lined up. And you have to ask, like, this is twice that he's gone to the altar, apparently, and then no-showed. How many more times is the government going to plan a wedding for Mark Carney just to have him show up and leave all the guests at the table waiting and wondering at the church what's going on with them? But it's like they couldn't even update the required succession planning for who the finance minister is. Okay, maybe they couldn't have put publicly on their website that it was Mark Carney because they had to hide it from Miss Freeland at the time. But surely, like, why was Randy Boissonnault on that? The disgraced former EDC or ESDC minister.
Oh, shut up, Khalid.
Yes, Ms. Khalid.
I believe that the debate is specifically on scheduling the meetings from tomorrow onwards to January 26th. So I question the relevance.
He is well within his right. This is relevant, and it is not repetitive, and he's not reading. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor.
Thanks. But again, you have to wonder, okay, we knew Friday, the government knew Friday that they were going to fire the finance minister at the time, and okay, except Mr. Forbes wasn't told, and he wasn't preparing the transition binder, which you think they would plan a bit better when we're in a crisis right now, financial crisis, the dollar's cratering, and then we have Trump south of the border threatening 25% tariffs if we don't get our act together on the border and other issues and defense spending.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Just out of politeness for our witnesses, is Mr. McCauley planning to go on until 1 o'clock?
This is not a point of order.
No, but I know.
This meeting is blown up because of you. Do not attempt to pin it on Mr. McCauley.
Yeah.
So,
24 hours, man.
Mr. McCauley, you have the floor, please.
I am shocked that Mr. Durand would deprive our witnesses of my Christmas offering to them of oh, I've got lots of free advice and lots of questions. But in getting back for the third time, which again the government has listed on their website, finance minister, unavailable, listed the industry minister, who of course is embroiled in the Green Slush Fund as well. And if Canadians are wondering what that is, that's what's tied up Parliament, I think, for 10 weeks now, where the government has, this committee has ordered, Parliament has ordered documents regarding the Green Slush Fund, specifically around Minister Champagne and his predecessor, to be tabled, and the government's blocking it. So the minister embroiled in the slush fund is next on the list to deliver the full economic statement. He, of course, famously refused. A, I don't blame him. B, I just find it curious. But who was next on the list was Randy Boissonnault. And I have to question the competence. Like, surely someone would have said, who's next on the list after Minister Champagne? Surely someone. There's a lot of people in finance, a lot of people in the government, a lot of paid political staffers, a lot of exempt staffers. Surely someone should have said, hey, isn't this the same Randy that just got thrown out of cabinet for falsely claiming Indigenous status? Of course, someone would have said, well, actually, he was thrown out of cabinet for perhaps continuing his business with Mr. Anderson, or perhaps it was one of the other reasons he was thrown out of cabinet. But surely someone could have, in crisis mode, when they were going through the list, have known maybe we should put someone else up on the list. There are some qualified members even at this table who could have read the fall economic statement quite competently, and I mean that sincerely. But surely someone, no, I think you could have, sir. But seriously, like,
I mean, I know I did.
but maybe other Randy's sitting in Edmonton Centre enjoying his last few months before the election, where before he gets thrown out, thinking, "Hey, I'm next. I'm back in cabinet." But no, Randy, you're not. Instead, what happened? I think it was the Miss School. No, and I agree with Mr. Durante saying don't measure the windows for curtains before the election happening. But I'm pretty sure I can safely state that Edmonton Centre will not be returning Mr. Bosno to the House of Commons. Sorry, Randy, if you're watching, but there's guessing, there's hoping, and then there's reality, and that's just the reality, I'm afraid. But again, what ended up happening? We had, I think, it was the Liberal House Leader ended up coming in with a fall economic statement, dropping it, and then fleeing. So we didn't have an attempt to actually address the fall economic statement. But getting back to the public accounts, I accept some of Ms. Boudreau's comments, but we have seen a massive increase in the public servants. Surely there was a transition plan for the Comptroller General's office. Mr. Houpé left, but there's lots of people in the department who are very competent, who could have certainly achieved this in time. Where I have great lack of faith in some of the explanations is this is the same government, the same department that famously a couple years ago reopened the public accounts after they'd already been signed off on in order to stuff money back in to show perhaps a better reason. We actually ATIP'd, this is I think 3 years ago, we actually ATIP'd to access information, the information around that, and we're still waiting. Some of my ATIPs will actually be eligible for pension before NDP leader Jagmeet Singh will get his pension. Maybe that's when the government will actually release those. But we have now administration government that has, for the first time since Confederation, reopened public accounts, stuffed money into the previous year, closed the accounts. Then we have this year, the latest ever, and then we hear some of the reasons why. $16 billion more put in for contingent liabilities, and I accept that the $16 billion is fully legit, but I have to wonder, April, when the budget came out, actually I think it came out after the beginning of the new fiscal year, this money wasn't in there. Like what happened in the short period between that and now where all of a sudden there's $16 billion? And that was the question I was asking, because the wording is very specifically about items that are basically assessed as likely to result. So basically what happens with the contingent liabilities, lawsuits, or other obligations, when they mature enough that, yes, it's going to result in a settlement, that's when they get put on the books. So what's happened between the budget coming out and very recently that they delayed the public accounts to be put in? I would like to actually ask the witnesses here, but of course the Liberals are blocking our ability to actually ask those questions. And again, well, I would certainly like to ask them. I would ask them right now, but I don't think they're allowed to take the floor. Perhaps they can sign up to be on this speaking order afterwards. But it's a great concern. I mean, we have late public accounts. We had commentary about the pensions for the public, the surplus. And I have great concern actually over the surplus for a couple of reasons. One, I believe the Treasury Board and the government uses a false discount rate. We actually saw some internal documents from the government about the pensions explaining their excessively high, in some people's views, discount rate for the funded portion of the public service pensions. But their explanation is we can have a high discount rate because we can take higher risks, or we take higher risks and get higher, or we get higher returns because we take higher risks. We can take higher risks because the taxpayers are on the hook for any losses. So instead of using a real return bond that we use for the unfunded portion of the pensions, I think the pre-2005 portion, we use an artificial high number, which actually perhaps hides a lot of the liability that this government has on public service pensions. The C.D. Howe Institute has guesstimated it to be about not a surplus, but an $80 billion deficit if you used real return bonds like other pensions do. And if you look at the public accounts, I haven't got them, they haven't been printed. I think apparently PSBC Public Services takes 2 weeks to print a book, 3 books the size like this. Chrystia Freeland managed to get her new book out in a day's notice and 2 days into chapters, but the government takes 2 weeks to print a book like this. So we don't actually have it here. It's only in PDF portion. I'd like to be able to look it up, but I can't, but I'll actually explain where what the discount rate is. But getting back to what I was talking about, my concern with the pensions, Ms. Boudreau explained that was one of the delays. My belief is, well, if the pension surplus is recognized in this fiscal year, which started April 1 of this year, then that money would be recognized in this year. It would not go into previous year. So I'm not sure why that pension money, and Mr. Canning's brought it up, and my colleague from the bloc brought up the pension as well. We certainly like to ask those questions, but of course, the government is blocking our ability to look at that. Government's blocking our ability to look at this whole scandal of the finance minister getting turfed on a Friday, but still told she has to come back and present the fall economic statement, take the fall for being $20 billion over, and then take a new role in the cabinet where she has no staff or no power or anything to make way for Mark Carney. I appreciate Minister LeBlanc stepping up to take his role as well. Perhaps it'll make it easier for him to access Clam Scam 2 or some other favors for the family as he has done in the past. But it makes you wonder, like, we knew Friday, the government knew Friday that Minister Freeland was going to leave her role. We're in an economic crisis right now. We're into our 6th quarter in a row of GDP per capita dropping, which means the wealth generated per person in Canada is dropping. We're now at the same level we were 2018, whereas the U.S. has gone up, I think, 25%. We used to be almost even GDP per capita in this country. We're now at about 50, I think we're at 55,000 U.S., and the U.S. has shot up to 81,000. Ireland, which people used to flee Ireland for economic reasons, as my great-grandparents did, now has a GDP per capita of over 100,000 U.S., and we're at 55. But I digress. We are in this economic crisis of a collapsing economy. Unemployment is up to 6.8, 6.9%. Who knows if it's going to break 7. 10% in Toronto, 8% in Edmonton. Again, 6 straight quarters. Former Bank of Canada Governor, Mr. Palaz, stated we are in a recession. We're not in a technical recession of 2 straight quarters of GDP decline. He states we are in a full-blown recession, and the numbers show it. The only thing hiding that is the out-of-control immigration growth that even the government has stated, yeah, we let go out of control and we have to cut it back. So on one hand, it's like, well, they're flooding the country with new people when we don't have housing for them, we don't have hospitals for them, we don't have doctors for them, but it's propping up the economy, the GDP, and they're hiding behind that as saying, oh, we've got the best economy in the G7.
Mr. McCauley, that was Paul. I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to very soon dismiss the witnesses. I suspect Madame Sinclair would like to speak. Before I do that, would you yield? I'll put you back on the list. I know you're on a roll. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to be respectful. So you can decline me, but it was just to.
I have so much more, but I'd be very happy to allow Ms. Sinclair Deguiné to sub in for for a moment.
I will move you down. I'm going to turn to Madame Sixla-Dingagé, please, and then I will come back to the witnesses.
Merci pour votre générosité.
Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Macaulay, and thank you, Chair, for suggesting the idea. I think it's a real shame that while we had witnesses and we had so many questions to be asking them, that a motion was moved at the beginning of the committee. Mr. Drouin, it's customary that the motions are moved in the last round to allow parties such as the Bloc Québécois and the NDP to make their points rather than encouraging a filibuster from the Conservatives. So it's really both sides of the House that don't want to see the House or the Parliament make any progress or get any work done. Even with the short notice and everything, I'm really disappointed. The subject of the motion doesn't really interest me that much because we really had the witnesses and we could be talking to them instead of doing this. So I will cede the floor back to Mr. Macaulay, who will probably take us to the end of the committee today. Once again, I'd like to underline that this waste of time is really, really unfortunate, and we could have and should have avoided this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Khalid is not in the room. I will go to the next person. That is.
Oh, thankfully.
No, I'm going to move you down to the bottom. But, well, it's Mr. Jamil, so I will see you instead, since I'm sure Mr. Giovanni, pardon me, will be happy to yield his spot to you, Mr. Macaulay.
Thank you. One thing I do want to address, besides, just how disappointed I am that we're not able to ask witnesses these questions, it's important stuff, is the motion actually blocks committee from meeting. They may claim that under 1064, which for those watching at home, maybe 5 of you now, a 1064 is a procedure that if 4 members of this committee writes to the chair, we can force a meeting, but it doesn't actually allow meetings to delve into the scandals of the Green Slush Fund, the scandal of the CEBA loan.
Mr. Macaulay, sorry, just hold your thoughts. The witnesses are excused. Thank you very much. We will see you all again in the new year. I appreciate you coming in today, and I apologize
I wanted them
for
here
this
to berate them.
Needless delay. Merry Christmas, yes. Mr. Macaulay, you have the floor.
Macaulay's, I like
and
this
as the
stuff.
witnesses leave, I just want to yell at them a bit more. Merry Christmas. I appreciate your attempt to get the public accounts to us before Christmas. The 1064 does not actually allow meetings into the scandals. All it allows is a meeting to decide whether there are meetings. And we could end up having 4 members from different parties sign the 1064. We could come to Ottawa, present a meeting to discuss some of the scandals, such as the Green Slush Fund, such as the finance minister getting fired right before the fall economic statement, with a $60 billion deficit that is causing the dollar to drop, causing uncertainty, and as the papers say, giving a gift to Trump in his fight against us with his tariffs, because it shows us as weak and chaotic. We could just have the members of the government with their coalition partner with the NDP immediately move to adjourn the meeting. So this is a false outreach that the government will put forward. Oh, you could have a 1064 any time in January or February or break week. But it's not really true. As we saw years ago with other times we've had 1064s, we get here and the government and the coalition partners say we don't want to work on a break week. We do not want the committee looking into our scandals. We do not want a light shown on this disaster of a government. So I reject the argument, oh, we could have a 1064 any time. We can't. The reality is the government could still simply move to adjourn that or block any meeting, period, as we actually had in the past. I think on ArriveCan. So, getting back, there's one of the things, and it's unfortunate the Auditor General has laughed because one of the issues that she brought forward in her opinion. It's actually not in the public accounts itself. You have to look online for her commentary, because the public accounts, by the way, is, I have to say, I'm very disappointed. It's gone from a audited opinion to a propaganda piece for the government. If you read some of the, I'm going to call it what it is, a lie, the government talks about the carbon tax being revenue neutral. But it is not revenue neutral. To say so is a lie. And here we have a government document signed by the Comptroller General, signed by the Receiver General, signed off, delivered by the Treasury Board, signed by the Auditor General, where you have copy, not the numbers, but you have copy, editorial, which is government talking points, in this case specifically a lie. Because the carbon tax is not revenue neutral. The carbon tax has a GST. Alberta alone would be paying, I think, it's $100 million in GST just on the carbon tax. The carbon tax also does not, on a straight revenue neutral, would every penny collected from taxpayers would go to taxpayers. It actually does not. Some is diverted to government operations. I think a couple years ago, $100 million was diverted to government operations. Some is diverted to small and medium enterprises. So therefore, again, it is not revenue neutral. It is, again, being used a bit as slush fund. I've got it somewhere in my papers, and I hope to be able to refer to it. The OECD, in their description of revenue neutral, states that it is money that cannot, taxation money that cannot be used to discriminate or push spending patterns a certain way, which is exactly the whole point of the carbon tax. And I'm not arguing what the intent of the carbon tax is, which is to drive up prices one way and force habits perhaps another way toward less carbon intensive. That is the whole point of the carbon tax. But the OECD states that such actions means it is not revenue neutral. So here we have the OECD basically saying that the carbon tax, just the idea of a carbon tax, is not revenue neutral. Also, of course, we had the oil carve-out for people from New Brunswick, like our chair from the wonderful province of New Brunswick and other provinces in the Atlantic Canada, where the Liberal government cynically did a carve-out and told those in Alberta and Saskatchewan suffering through -40, we're going to tax you extra to heat your home. We're going to tax you more despite the fact you have some of the coldest temperatures in the country. But in areas where we're polling very poorly and are getting pressure from our MPs because they're going to lose the next election, we are going to give you a carbon tax carve-out. So again, it violates the whole neutrality of a carbon tax, but further violates the definition of the carbon tax as stated by the OECD. But I'm getting back to the carbon tax, and I read, the federal pollution pricing system is revenue neutral. This year, they've added a bit of a disclaimer. Over time for the federal government. Now,
yes, Mr. Durain. You'll notice where I'm going. I thought there was no reading allowed during filibusterings.
I am quoting from something.
Yeah, you can cite, but yeah. So if you just bear that in, Mr. Durain is correct. I am not saying you're reading.
No, I am
back to you. Yes, you can cite. You can you can cite it as you're doing. Continue.
Thank you very much. And before I was interrupted by such silliness, the federal pollution pricing system is revenue neutral over time for the federal government. Of course, in the House of Commons, repeatedly the government stood up and said it's revenue neutral. Previous public accounts, it's revenue neutral. Now it's revenue neutral, but over time. Perhaps the budget will balance itself over time for the federal government. You can't have an accounting number being stated as a certainty over time. It's either revenue neutral or it's not revenue neutral, and it is not. I want to continue with other points from the public accounts, and I'm happy to paraphrase them if I can't read the public accounts verbatim. One of the things it states is, government will announce that starting in fiscal 2025, the share of fuel charge proceeds returned to Indigenous governments, which is fair, but that's a policy statement, will increase from 1% to 2%. So then I have to ask, where is this extra 100% increase for the proceeds coming from? And I'm not criticizing the policy decision. They should actually back it up, because there are areas where certain Indigenous are maybe requiring a lot higher increase, more rural, further north, than perhaps southern ones. I'm thinking of the Inkami band in First Nations in BC, which has phenomenal wines, phenomenal hotel. I think they're a lot less affected. Okay, BC is not part of the backstop, but as an example, a lot less affected by cost of heating than perhaps the McLeod up by Fort McMurray. So I wish they'd actually backed it up with actual, we're going to do it from 1%, increase them from 1% to 2% based on this information, or we're going to do it based on need as opposed to we've increased it. Look at us. Look how virtuous we are. They should actually back it up. But again, where's that extra 1% coming from? It's coming from the general pool. Possibly that makes it non-revenue neutral. Further, as announced in Budget 2024, the government will return proceeds directly to small and medium enterprise businesses and provinces where the federal fuel charge is in place through Canada Carbon Rebate for small businesses, a new refundable tax credit. If you recall, this was announced several years ago. And again, where's this money coming from? If it's coming from in the year for the year, as the public account states, then how can it be revenue neutral, and where's this money coming from? And where was the money that they collected since 2019? It's several billion. It's not noted in the public accounts. It's not noted as what I can see in the fall economic statement. So is it coming from general revenues? And does nothing, of course, to address two issues, and I wish our witnesses were here so we could ask. I wish our previous witnesses from the EDC, which was administering the CEBA, I could ask them, but of course that was blocked by Liberal motions, guillotine motion as well. The government is going to return several $billions to small and medium enterprises to offset carbon tax that they had to pay, which was wonderful. Why so late? Where's the money coming from? But what happened to all the companies that have paid into it from 2019 to 2024 that have gone bankrupt or in receivership? Will they be receiving the money? For the CEBA money, are we going to have assurances that none of the money, none of this carbon tax rebate money is going to go to the many thousands of companies that have defrauded taxpayers? I think it was 1 out of every 11, so 9% of the 100,000 some odd businesses that received CEBA money were ineligible. $3.5 billion so far that we know of. And it's probably a lot more. The AG believes so as well. But what assurances are we going to have that the government is not going to be sending carbon rebate checks to companies that owe taxpayers that money back? I wish I could ask, but of course we cannot. When is the SME rollout going to be? And where is that money coming from? Is it solely from small and medium enterprises? Has it been put into a separate pot of money? We don't know. One of the funny things about the payment for the carbon tax rebate, it used to be on a year-to-year basis. So money collected in a year was paid out in a year. Of course, now it's done quarterly, And of course, with cash accounting, it's recorded when it's paid out. So if I get a check in the fiscal year, if I get a check, for example, April 5th, that's 5 days into the new year, but it was money collected in the past year. So that money collected will be accrued in 1 year, but the payout will be showing in the next. I believe the government had actually changed this a couple of years ago when it actually brought up in this very committee how it wasn't revenue neutral, how money was being taken by the government to fund other programs within the government. And it was actually right in the public accounts where they admitted it. And lo and behold, what happens next year? Oh, it's done on an offset. So when we asked Finance and the AG, what is the money coming in, money going out, rebated? Oh, we don't know. It's on a different calendar now because now it's collected 1 year, perhaps paid out another, because of course now it's paid out quarterly for money that was collected the previous year. Did they do it to hide it? You know, there's Hanlon's razors, you know, don't attribute to malice, which is more attributed to incompetence. This time I'm really not sure. And of course there's the, as I mentioned, the oil heater, the heater, the cutout for New Brunswick and other provinces. There was one finance document stating that, of course, there's a huge carve-out for oil heating in Atlantic Canada. I used to live in Newfoundland. Our house was entire baseboard, electric baseboard heaters, but a lot of my, when we're looking for housing, a lot of them actually had oil heaters attached to the house or even buried.
Yeah, yeah.
But the government said that, okay, we're going to carve out, they're not going to charge GST or carbon tax on the oil heating. Therefore, there's less money collected. Makes sense. Therefore, it would make sense that less money would be distributed because, of course, it's carbon neutral. Anything collected will be returned. But we have a finance document that actually stated there won't be a reduction in the rebates. So where's that money coming from? Are people in Alberta who are paying to heat their homes, paying high carbon tax into general revenue, subsidizing the Atlantic provinces?
Yep, that's
we
exactly
actually
what
asked
it
that in
is.
finance, and they stated, no, it's only what is collected. But it's like, but we have a statement saying there wouldn't be a reduction. So you can't collect less taxes and still pay out, but apparently that's what the government is doing. I wish I could ask them. Oh, actually, here it is. Sorry, I apologize. I had it right in front of me the whole time. I am going to read a quote. I'm not reading notes. I'm reading a quote from the OECD, Fundamental Principles of Taxation. Why would I have this? Well, why wouldn't I? As I mentioned last week, I actually have a copy of the Royal Bank of Scotland analysis on flow-throughs for pricing for energy costs, because who wouldn't have that study on their laptop? Anyways, a neutral tax will contribute to efficiency by ensuring that optimal allocation of the means of production is achieved. A distortion and the corresponding dead weight will occur when changes in price trigger different changes in supply and demand that would occur in the absence of the tax. In this sense, neutrality also entails that the tax system raises revenue while minimizing discrimination in favor of or against any particular economic choice. And that is the exact opposite of the carbon tax. A distortion and corresponding deadweight loss will occur when changes in price trigger different changes in supply and demand. And I fully accept the carbon tax is meant to change demand. We jack up the carbon tax, another increase is coming April 1. We're going to increase, I think it's another $15 a ton, it's going to be another 11 cents a liter. Its intent is to change your choice of habits or the demand for gasoline, the demand for home heating. The very fact where taxpayers in Alberta are subsidizing extra folks in Atlantic Canada for the, can't remember the name of the heaters, the heating pumps.
Heat pumps, yep.
Means that we are affecting choice and demand, because the demand in New Brunswick for heating oil will drop, the demand for heating pumps should increase again, but that's part of the plan. But it violates what the definition of revenue neutral is. So here we have the government of Canada pushing in public accounts, which is accounting. And again, you can have a different opinions on, or you can't have a different opinion on the accounting books. 1 and 1 equals 2. I actually have this argument all the time with my associate from Winnipeg North, who I take great joy in teasing, and he takes great joy in teasing me back, and we have a fun relationship that way. But I asked once in the House of Commons, he was going on about cuts to CBSA, and I pulled out the public accounts from 2016 that actually showed the Liberal government cut spending in CBSA, and they cut spending in 2017 as well. And the member from Winnipeg North got up and said, well, it wasn't really right that I was quoting statistics because these things aren't always true. And I'm thinking, well, you know, public accounts don't lie, so someone is lying. The numbers do not lie. Revenue neutral is not true, and yet the government puts it in to the public accounts. They're lying in the public accounts, misleading parliamentarians in the public accounts, misleading Canadians in the public accounts. We have a government that's reopened the public accounts for the first time in history for political reasons. We have them apparently, I think this year, delaying the public accounts till the day before the House rises to hide the fact that the deficit blew past the failed finance minister's projections, her line in the sand. Public accounts were signed off on December 9th. But the original report had, first go round, had gone, I understand, as early as September 30th to the Auditor General. We knew what the deficit was before it was tabled. But why didn't the government release the public accounts? I don't believe the false reason about the pensions, because again, Public Sector Accounting Board rules that revenue was, the surplus was realized in 24-25 fiscal year. So it would have no bearing on the past year. Zero bearing. And yet they trotted that out as a reason why the public accounts were delayed. I believe the government delayed the public accounts so that when we asked what the deficit was in November, they would not have to tell the truth. When we asked in October, they would not have to reveal to Canadians that they blew past their line in the sand. And I believe that is why when we asked last week, repeatedly, what is the deficit, that the government would not release that information. And it's very curious, again, and one of the examples they used was $16 billion of contingent liability, and I accept that, but what I don't accept is what has changed since the budget was released, when they could have forecasted this, and very recently. And it's not the only thing that's very different from the budget, which again was released not that long ago, just a few months ago, and what's in the fall economic statement. And I'm going to read again. I'm sorry if I'm triggering people, but I want to read from the public accounts from 2022-2023, which is 2 years ago, which again, remember we had the $40 billion line in the sand, and we had a commitment to a declining GDP, debt to GDP. The accumulated deficit, the difference between liabilities and assets, or federal debt, stood at $1.236 billion, so $1,236 billion, so $1.236 trillion at March 31st, 2024. The accumulated deficit to gross domestic product ratio was 42.1%, up from 41.1% previous year. So it's up. The government remains committed to its fiscal anchor, reducing the federal deficit of its share of the economy over the medium term. So again, it is up. The government says we're committed to our fiscal anchor. Remember how many times the fired deputy minister stated they're committed to their fiscal anchor of 40 billion, which of course turned to be 61 billion, but they put that in the public accounts. So what's in the public accounts for this year? The accumulated debt, oh, here we go again. Accumulated debt was up from last year. The debt to GDP ratio was again up from last year. The government remains committed to a fiscal anchor reducing federal debt. The exact same wording in 2022 public accounts. The government remains committed to its fiscal anchor of reducing federal debt. A year later, the government remains committed to its fiscal anchor reducing federal debt. Again, accumulated debt to GDP was up. So here we have the government in its public accounts admitting that higher, they went up, but apparently higher is lower, because when you have a fiscal framework, when you have a debt to GDP anchor, when you have a line in the sand, apparently you can lie about it. You can lie to Canadians about it. The accounting numbers don't change, but you can say that somehow down is up and left is right, and apparently to the government, wrong is right. Which leads into public debt charges. Public debt charges were up $12.3 billion, or 35%, largely reflecting an increase in the average effective interest rate on interest-bearing debt, offset in part by lower consumer index adjustments on real return bonds. If you remember what I talked about, real return bonds and the public service pension plan. If real return bonds is dropping, the discount rate should not be so high, but I digress. The Deputy Prime Minister states, we forecast in this fiscal year, et cetera, pushing our debt into bonds with a longer maturity ensures that Canada's debt servicing costs remain low. She repeats that in the House. And yet they state that interest payments have gone up. So how much the taxpayers lost because the government didn't invest in longer bonds as they stated they would? Argentina was able, despite their economic problems, able to float a 100-year bond. There's 50-year bonds available, and yet despite the government stating twice or several times, both publicly in their previous fiscal update before she was fired, and in the House itself, don't have to worry about the debt charges, our interest charges, because we're buying long-term bonds. If we recall, a couple years ago, Glenn McGregor, I think it was with CTV at the time, asking the PM about the threat of very high servicing costs, and the Prime Minister looking condescendingly at him in that special tone of his. Interest rates are at a historic low, Glenn. But what happened?
I remember that video.
At a historic low. They went up, and we see a mass 35% increase in interest payments. I wish we had finance officials here so we could ask how much the out-of-control money printing led to the higher interest rates that led to the higher debt that somehow the government couldn't figure out. If I'm doing out-of-control money printing, and I know I'm going to be doing that, and I know it's going to be causing an inflation, you think I would also know, you know what, insider trading, I'm going to go and push our debt purchasing, bond issuing, far into the future to get locked in its lowest rate possible. But, of course, we didn't. In just a couple years, 2022, the budget came out. Of course, the budget always forecasts out in 5 years, 4 years into the future, costs. 2023, 2024, 4 years going out, they projected $152 billion in interest payments. This was not a long time ago. This was not in 1990. This was a very short time ago. The 2023-2024, the 2022 budget. We started out, again for 4 years, $152 billion in interest payments, which is a hell of a lot. The fiscal update that just came out, presented by some random Liberal cabinet minister, because I guess Randy wasn't available, $212.8 billion in interest. So interest on the debt in for over 4 years has gone up $60 billion from the budget produced 2 years ago. Think about that. This is how incompetent this government is, that they were out $60 billion. So it's basically 60 over 152 is, 40% higher interest rates to service the debt from just 2 years ago. Came up in the supplementary estimates A. In OGO, we asked, they had $2 billion for higher interest rates. And it's well, the A's come out shortly after the mains, which was shortly after the budget. How could you be out $2 billion to be coming to Parliament just a couple months into the year saying we need $2 billion? Because a couple months ago, we misforecasted what the interest payments were going to be. Is anyone in this room, anyone of the 5, 6 people watching, think 2 years ago, I'm going to be out that much? I'm going to work out the exact total. Bear with me here 2 seconds. 39%. They're out 39%. I'm sure the government is going to try and argue, well, things have changed, the economy's slowing. But the revenue, as projected 2 years ago, to the fiscal update, or the revenue increase over the 4 years was 17%, in the fiscal update, 4 years, 17%, and that budget that I'm referring to shows 16%. So they're forecasting basically the same revenue, but somehow they misforecasted 40%. All the brainiacs that we have in finance, all the brainiacs we have at Treasury Board, massive increase in amount of bodies, and yet somehow they were out by $60 billion over a 4-year period. And what the deficit, the interest payments, not just the deficit. The deficit, they were only out $20 billion on the deficit over a 1-year period. That's almost the same just in interest payments. $60 billion. We will collect maybe $200 billion in GST. So they were out 30% of the value of the GST in just a 4-year, in just over 4 years, but just from 2 years ago. And again, this is not like turn of the century or perhaps Chrétien Martin era or Stephen Harper era or even early Bill Morneau era forecasting for it. This was the now fired finance minister herself 2 years ago, missing interest payments by $60 billion. That was actually probably the second largest line now in the budget after OAS, greater than what we're actually paying to provinces for healthcare support. So I hope people remember that when they're waiting in line for 8, 10, 12 hours at their hospitals for care, that the government could have been spending, if they planned better, could have been spending money on healthcare transfers and hiring doctors instead of misforecasting $60 billion. Now, I know Mr. Cannings and Ms. Sinclair Deguenet were talking about the public service pensions earlier. If I was a public service employee knowing it's the same people nominally in charge as this, I'd be scared silly. But good thing for them, the actual taxpayers are on the hook for public sector pensions. So even though there is a surplus, it doesn't affect the public servants one bit. Just the same as if there was a deficit, it would not affect them one bit because they're guaranteed by legislation. The same with the pre-2005 pensions, which is not funded separately as post-2005. Pre-2005 is just funded out of basically general revenue. If you look at the actuarial statement for the year, it does show the two funds separately. I think the 2005 one is underfunded by $7 billion. So that should actually even be applied to the post-2005, which actually technically would bring the surplus below the 25%. So if anything, the argument is, why is the government trying to take that $1.9 billion in surplus, and what are they taking it for? The argument shouldn't be that there's a surplus and should go back to employees or should go back to with lower payments. Is there is one public servant, there's one taxpayer, there are two funds, one is unfunded, one is overfunded. Why don't they count the deficit against the surplus, as any of us would do? If you have a bank account and a mortgage, you don't say, hey, I've got $10,000 in the bank, look how rich I am if you've got a mortgage of $10 million, or $10 million. You count the two of them together. So do companies, but the government counts these two separately. So again, to my colleagues, Mr. Cannings and Ms. Sinclair-Dagenais, I think the questioning should be not what are they doing with their surplus, but how are they claiming it as a surplus? The government changed the law in 2019 in the budget, changed what the surplus would be. I wish we had officials here to explain why the 2005 unfunded portion is not being counted against that supposed surplus. And again, what is their intent to do with that money? Roll it in to reduce the deficit? Was Mark Carney going to step in and say, well, that was Chrystia Freeland's mistake at $61 billion. Look, we're in surplus. Look, we found $2 billion. I wish we could find out. We could find out next week in meetings, or 2 weeks in meetings, 3 weeks in meetings, but we won't find out if the Liberals have their way. Getting back actually to the public service pension, I wish we could actually have a bit more transparency about that fund. As I mentioned, they don't actually own stocks and bonds like a lot of us think they actually have. When they declare that their fund is up X percent, it's based a bit on market capitalization and based on, I think, Kentucky windage, but not an actual firm amount. The Auditor General actually referred to it in her notes from her last public accounts report from last year, concerns about how they were working out their valuations. The same with CPP, how they actually come up with their funding. And speaking of CPP, I wish we had the officials here we could ask again, as I do each year, about how the government works out their lowest net GDP. Because when the government talks about their net GDP, they count the CPP money as an asset, but they don't count the liabilities, what they owe to grandma, grandpa, myself in 5 years. Unfortunately, I'm that old. But they don't count the obligations. But they count the assets. And so when the former and fired finance minister would stand in the House and say, we have the best net GDP ratio in the G7, it's not, well, it's true under her formulation. And as the former deputy minister for finance said a couple of years ago, it uses mental gymnastics to come up with that number. The Fraser Institute uses numbers. This is an IMF, says you can use this. But when you use OECD calculations, we're actually 22nd out of 29. We're the 7th worst for debt to GDP. What brings down our debt to GDP is counting CPP. So I actually posed the question. It was Mr. Sabia at the time, was the deputy minister, and his ADM. You know, the only way you can count the CPP as an asset is if you have access to use it. And Mr. Sabia actually started, well, yes, that is. And then he caught himself because he did not want to say the truth, which is you can only count that asset, the CPP, the money set aside for seniors, paid for by seniors and their companies, not paid for by the government, but half paid for by taxpayers and half paid by their company into the fund. The only way you could count it for financial or accounting reasons, according to the IMF, is if the government could access that money for operational reasons. And that is the dirty secret about the government stating their net GDP ratio is the lowest in the G7. Yes, the U.S. is a basket case, but You can never count the U.S. out, and it doesn't take much for them to flip things around like Bill Clinton did. He actually ran surpluses. They have the ability to gear up. Germany actually, I think, when you look at their numbers, actually has a lower net debt to GDP than us, and they've just announced $100 billion in tax cuts, so they actually will be moving further ahead. But we're only net, we can claim we're only the lowest when you count the money for the CPP. I think it's $700 billion, but you don't count the liability. So anyone who's watching at home who is collecting CPP, or perhaps your parents are collecting CPP, know this: when the government talks about having the lowest net debt to GDP, it's because they are counting not what's owed to our seniors, but what is set aside for the seniors, knowing that they can only count it in accounting lingo if they have access to the CPP for operational reasons. I don't think the government's going to do that. It would be suicide, and I'm not saying the Liberals would, but they're lying to Canadians when they're saying we have the lowest debt to GDP. If we compare it to the OECD, apples to apples, we are 22nd out of 29. We are the 7th worst for debt to GDP. I see the chair's
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Fogg, I'm going to interrupt you. I just, we are out of resources, but I'm going to take 30 seconds. In the spirit of transparency, Mr. Durian, this is not out of spite. I'd already signaled this to one other opposition member. I am planning to have meetings in January. The week of January 2 over 7 and 9, and several over 20 to 23rd. You'll be receiving notices on this. So I have endeavored to work the best I can with the schedule the government has outlined on these documents.
Point of order,
and I am
Chair.
sorry they do not line up with your schedule. This meeting is adjourned.
Point of order, Chair.
He's just like, nope, you're not getting your point of order. Bye-bye. That was a great way to end the meeting. That was like a mic drop. He's just like, nope, too bad. No point of order for you. I don't want to listen to you anymore. Go on your Christmas holiday. If she even celebrates Christmas. I don't know if she does, but oh, that was fantastic, guys. That just made my day. That really just made my day. Point of order. You didn't listen to my motion. My motion was that so we don't have to work it all in January. And he's just like, nope, we're calling meetings. Be prepared. And I love that Macaulay knew the assignment that was to filibuster the last hour, so that way we couldn't vote on the motion. And now that the motion hasn't been voted on, it doesn't mean that it's precedent. So just because the motion's tabled, it needs to be voted on and needs to pass for that to actually take effect. So, wow, that was amazing. That was great. It was worth it just for the last 10 seconds. Yeah, exactly. That was John doesn't usually do that, and I bet you any money, I can tell you right now, the first committee that we get back in January, she's going to complain about that. She's going to pull the woman card, and she's going to say, oh, you didn't respect my rights as a member, and as a woman, I feel that you didn't allow me to have my time to speak, and you constantly do this to me, and you berate me, and blah, 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 blah. I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that's what she's going to say. She's going to say, I said a point of order, and you didn't listen to me. So, anyway, that was fantastic. Wow, we've got 1,000 people watching, and we had 1,100 there for a bit. We peaked pretty good there, so really appreciate all you guys tuning in. I thought there was only going to be a couple hundred of you guys today because it's early in the morning and it's a Wednesday. So, yeah, we were just covering committee. As you guys know, the House is adjourned, so there's nothing else for us to watch. This was just called unilaterally by the chair at a very last minute. So I guess we keep an eye out for lives over the holidays. Well, I don't think they'll do anything between Christmas and New Year's and for the rest of the week, because usually for the rest of the week things are that's it. So that's pretty much it for us until the new year. In terms of live streams, I might do something in between Christmas and New Year's just as like a call-in session, so you guys can use your phone, you guys can reach out, we can have a quick little 3 to 5 minute chat between me and you guys. I'm going to try to work on that. Other people from other YouTube channels might call in and things like that. So we just have a quick little, hour or two session of just us talking and, nothing parliamentary in terms of that. We'll see how that goes. I'm going to try and work that out. And then, we'll look forward to the committees being called in January. I suspect Macaulay will do the same thing with OGO. I suspect Ethics Committee might do the same thing. And obviously we're going to get public accounts. So I have no idea. It sounds like somebody's drilling above me, which is absolutely insane. So we're going to call it here. I appreciate you guys tuning in and watching, and everybody subscribing and things like that. Yeah, there's some sort of drilling going on. What the hell? Oh, there we go. They stopped. I will see you guys hopefully in a week or two, maybe. Again, before New Year's. So let me see if I can check my schedule here. Yeah, we might do something like the 26th or the 27th, and we'll try and do something like a call-in session, like I said. So, Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays. I know some of you guys are traveling, so safe flights, safe traveling. And it looks like we have some super chats from Bill and Savage Silence. Really appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful evening, guys. See you.